This lesson is about the law of cosines. This is lesson 9.7. This goes hand in hand with our previous lesson about law of sines. They are similar and yet different. We are going to talk about how to use the law of cosines. As always, this has been brought to you by Conalonzo Inc. Our goals are to be able to find the missing sides of a triangle as well as to find the missing angles. We also want to be able to appropriately label and to understand how the pieces of a triangle work together. Again, that part is similar to what we talked about with law of sines. We're going to use them a little differently in the formula. So again, just to review the parts of a triangle, each angle is labeled by a capital letter. Each side is labeled by a small letter. We are dealing specifically with non-right triangles. So these are triangles that do not have that 90-degree angle. We're going to use the law of cosines today to help us figure out the missing pieces. These are the law of cosines. Now there are three versions of it. Notice they are exactly the same, except the sides and angles are moved around. So we're using a specific formula depending on what information we have in our, okay? I tend to just focus on one and switch A's, B's, and C's around as needed, and that's fine too. So kind of however you think of this, okay? So take a minute, write down the formulas, make sure that you have them so that you can evaluate those formulas. We are going to use the law of cosines here, and we have a triangle, we have one angle, and we have two sides. We do not have the third side, and that's what we're trying to find. So we're going to use law of cosines to set this up. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to label my pieces. So I'm going to call this A, and I'm going to call this angle A. And then I'm going to call this side B and angle B, this side C and angle C. That just kind of helps me put into the formula and get everything in the right spot, okay? I'm going to start, let's see, my formula is A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2BC times cosine of angle A. Now I'm just going to plug everything into its appropriate spots. A is X, so we have X squared. B is 400, so 400 squared. C is 375, so 375 squared, minus 2 times 400 times 375 times the cosine of 35. So all I did was plug everything into its respective position in the formula. Now I'm going to start evaluating. There is a very specific way to evaluate this so that you punch it into your calculator correctly. And I'm going to talk you through that. You are going to need to show some work for these problems. These are not where you just write it down and plug it all in, okay? You're going to have to write down a little bit so that you don't lose things or so that you evaluate them correctly. So let's start by squaring 400, which is 160,000. Make sure I get the right amount of zeros there. And 375 I'm going to square as well. That is 140,625. Now, I'm going to multiply 2 times 400 times 375. And I get 300,000. Still times the cosine of 35. Okay? Now I'm ready to punch this into my calculator. So here's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start actually at the back end, and I'm going to kind of work my way left. So I'm going to start with cosine of 35. I'm going to type that into my calculator, and I'm going to hit enter. I get 0.819, etc. Remember, leave this on your calculator. Do not hit clear at any point in this process, okay? Now I'm going to multiply by 300,000, and I'm going to include the negative. So I'm going to multiply times negative 300,000. Make sure you get the right amount of zeros here. And that gives me negative 245,745.6133, etc. I'm writing this down so you can check your work as you're punching it into the calculator along with me, I hope. Now I'm going to add So plus 140,625 plus 160,000 gives me a grand total of 54879.3867, etc. Now, again, that's not my answer because that's what x squared is equal to. I need to find x. Again, leave this number on your calculator. Do not delete it. Here's what we're going to do, because what we need to do is square root to finish solving. On your calculator, type in second, so hit the second button and hit the x squared button. So on your calculator, you should see this. Now hit the second button and the negative button. So now in your calculator, you should see that, the ANS. Then hit enter, and you get an answer of 234.26. We're going to use our label, which is meters. All right, so there was a lot to this. First, we plug everything into the formula. Then we start evaluating. Do your squareds first. Then work backwards. Start with your cosine, multiply by the negative number in front of it, then add the other two pieces. And then the last part is to square root. And here is your button progression that you're going to put into your calculator in order to make that work. So there's different pieces here. Can you fill in everything appropriately into the equation? Can you evaluate? Can you use your calculator to figure out the stuff that you need to and enter it correctly? I hope that the answer is yes. Feel free to rewind this and watch it again. We're going to move on and try another one. So again, I'm going to write my formula here. A squared equals b squared, c squared, minus 2bc, cosine angle A. And so on my triangle here, I am going to label this angle A because that's the angle that I have, which means this is side A. I already have angle B over here, so this is side B, meaning this is side C, and this is angle C, okay? So I've got everything labeled. Again, I just do that to help me know where to plug stuff into the formula. I'm going to start plugging in what I have. A is x, so I have x squared equals B, which is 10 squared, plus C, which is 12 squared, minus 2 times B times C times cosine of angle A, which is 62. So again, once I'm labeled my triangle, I'm plugging everything into its respective position. Now I'm going to start evaluating. So I'm going to start with 10 squared, which is 100, 12 squared, which is 144, and 2 times 10 times 12 is 240. Okay, so first I did some of my basic stuff. I squared my numbers, I multiplied the 2 times 10 times 12. Now I'm going to start with cosine of 62, and I'm going to work backwards, punching this into my calculator. So I'm going to start with cosine of 62, hit enter, 0.469, times negative 240 gives me negative 112.67, plus 144 plus 100 is 131.3268, etc. Now remember, this is where I want to square root. So I'm going to hit second x squared, second negative, and I get x equals 11.46. So this side is 11.46 over here, okay, and that's centimeters. Now, I also need to solve for some angles here. So let's do some work with that. Now that I know what my third side is, I can solve for some angles. And I could use law of sines here. That would work. Or I could use law of cosines. Law of sines is a little bit easier. And remember, once you have an angle and its corresponding side, we can use law of sines. So let's go back to that. We're going to take sine of 62 over 11.46. And I'm going to solve for angle B. So I want to put angle B, which I don't know. So sine of B over the side B, which is 10. Now I'm going to cross multiply. So I'm going to multiply 10 times sine of 62. And that's going to be equal to 11.46 times the sine of B. Remember, I'm going to divide by 11.46. And that is going to give me what the sine of B is equal to. So let me punch that in my calculator. So I'm going to multiply 10 times sine 62 is 8.8 something divided by 11.46 is 0.77 not repeating, sorry, going on forever. Now remember, I'm not clearing this from my calculator, and this is where I take the arc sign. So I hit second sign, second negative, and we get 50.395, 2, etc. So I'm going to round that to 50.40 or 0.4. I guess it doesn't matter. So angle B is 50.4 degrees. From there, we can find angle C. It would be really easy to just subtract the 50.4 and the 62 from 180. So that's what I'm going to do. And we get a measure of, that's angle B. Angle C is equal to 67.6 degrees. Okay, so we found all of our missing parts. We started out with law of cosines. Law of cosines is really complicated. We could have used that to find angle C, but it's kind of a pain, especially when you're trying to find the angle. So once we have an angle and its corresponding side, we can then solve to find the other information using law of sines. That's a little bit easier and a little bit faster for us, okay? Let's try another one. Here we have a triangle we need to solve for the missing parts. So we're trying to find side C, we're trying to find angle B, we're trying to find angle A. We know angle C, we know side B, and we know side A. So this is going to make that formula look a little different because this time I'm going to use the one for side C. So I'm going to say C squared equals A squared plus B squared minus 2AB cosine of angle C. It still works the same way. Okay, you're still plugging the stuff into the same positions. Notice how my variable, what I'm trying to solve for, is always on the left side of the equals. It should be that way because otherwise it's too hard. So you should always be using the formula that puts your variable that you're solving for on the left side, okay? So now I'm just going to fill everything in. Cosine of angle 37. And I'm going to start evaluating. So 8 squared is 64. 11 squared is 121. 2 times 8 times 11 is 176. Times the cosine of 37. Now I'm going to start with cosine of 37, and I'm going to start plugging things in. So cosine of 37 times negative 176 plus 121 plus 64. And I get c squared equals 44.44, etc. And I'm going to square root. So this is where I'm doing second x squared, second negative to insert my answer. And I get c equals 6.67 is how I'm going to round that. That is side C. Now I have all three sides and I have the corresponding angle. I am going to solve for the remaining angles using law of sines. I'm going to take sine of 37 over 6.67 equals the sine of angle B over the side B, which is 11. I'm going to cross multiply. So sine of 37 times 11 equals 6.67 times the sine of B. Divide by 6.67. And then I'm going to be taking the arc sine. So sine of 37 times 11 divided by 6.67 gives me 0.99, 0.9924, etc. So I'm going to do second sine, second negative, and I get that angle B is 82.98977. So let's round that to 83.0. So angle B, I now know, is 83 degrees. And I know C is 37. Let's just subtract those from 180. So 180 minus 83 minus 37 gives me an angle of 60 degrees. Okay, so hopefully this is starting to make sense. We can use law of cosines to help us solve for a missing piece, and then from there find the remainder of what we are working with. We have one more here. This is law of cosines we have to use, and we're going to find the angle. So this becomes a little more complicated in how we're solving. So make sure you're kind of working along, writing this down, and checking on your calculator so that you know how to enter this, okay? So I'm going to start by labeling my stuff. So I'm going to make this angle A, which means this is side A, angle B, side B, angle C, side C. Now I'm going to plug into my formula, which is a squared, b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cosine of a. A squared is 16, b squared is 8, and c is 22. Now I don't know a, so I'm going to leave that as cosine of a. This first step is kind of the same as before. I'm going to go through and I'm going to square and I'm going to multiply. So 16 squared is 256. 8 squared is 64. 22 squared is 484. I'm going to multiply 2 times 8 times 22, and I get 352 cosine of A. Now here's where it gets different than what we've done before, okay? We're going to start by subtracting 64 to get it to the other side. We're also going to subtract 484 to get it to the other side. I like to do these at the same time because I just like to do it quicker. So I'm going to take 256 minus 64 minus 484. That gives me a negative 292. And on the right side, I've gotten rid of the 64 and the 484, so I'm left with negative 352 cosine of A. Now I'm going to divide by negative 352 to get that away from the cosine. And I get, let's see, negative 292 divided by negative 352 is 0.829, etc. And that's equal to the cosine of A. Here's where I'm going to take the arc cosine. So I'm going to hit second cosine, and then I'm going to hit second negative to insert my answer. Okay, so you should see this on your screen when you're doing this, and hit enter, and you get 33.9479, etc. So let's make that 33.9 degrees. Okay, so we have found angle A, or angle X really. I probably should change that to angle X since that's what it's labeled, is 33.9 degrees. Now notice the direction's a little different. We were just told to solve for the angle. We're not being told to solve the triangle. So all we have to do is find this one angle because that's what we've been told to do, okay? So part of this too involves paying attention to the directions. Remember, if it says solve the triangle, it means you're finding all of the missing pieces. Otherwise, it will tell you specifically what pieces to solve for. Let's try one more where we are solving for the angle, just so we can practice working on our calculator skills, as well as getting everything in. Now this triangle is all labeled, and we are solving for angle B, okay? Which means we're gonna start with our b squared formula because that's the one that has angle B in it. Let me write this out. There we go. So side B is going to be 19. Oops, equals, sorry. Side A is 8, and side C is 14. Remember, I know this because these are the sides that are across from the angles. So side 8 is across from angle A, 14 is across from angle C. That's how I know which side is which, okay? Now I'm going to evaluate. So I'm going to start with 19 squared, which is 361. 8 squared is 64, and 14 squared is 196. I'm going to multiply 2 times 8 times 14, which is 224, times the cosine of b. Now remember, I'm going to subtract these two from the 361. So I'm going to take 361 minus 64 minus 196, which gives me 101. Now I'm going to divide by the negative 224, which is negative 0.4508, etc. This is where I take the arc cosine. So I'm going to type in second cosine, second negative to insert my answer, and I get B is equal to 116.8009, etc. So I'm going to leave it as 116.8, or really, because it's labeled as angle X, okay? Again, we're told to solve for the angle, so that's all I need to do here. I'm going to stop. That was a fairly involved process anyway. So hopefully you are feeling more confident about law of cosines and you feel like you can solve for the angle. I'm going to leave this one here and see if you want to try it just for a little extra practice. Practice that one more, solving for the angle, okay? Can you set up an equation? In other words, can you use the right formula depending on the information that you have? Can you then solve it? Do you know the correct order and using your calculator appropriately? And then can you use the law of cosines to do this? I hope that the answer is yes. Definitely do some more practice with this. And if you have questions, you can always ask. But I hope law of cosines is making sense for you. And I hope that you are also understanding how to use your calculator. Either of those things, let us know, and we are happy to help. Take care and hope you have a wonderful time working with law of cosines.